low-key super nervous. This is my first time filming in this apartment. Like filming a sit-down video in this apartment, which is actually pretty exciting. This is my new home. This is also the best books of 2023 video, or at least my favorite books of 2023. Yeah, so that's why I'm wearing a crown, because I did that last year. But essentially last year, in 2023, it was not a good reading year. I really did not prioritize reading. I was in a reading slump I don't even want to say a reading slump. I just prioritized other things in my life while still reading here and there, which is good. But I will say that a lot of what I was reading, I didn't feel particularly, I don't want to say connected to, because there were a lot of things that I enjoyed. I don't know, it just wasn't the year of reading for me, if I'm being completely honest. But last year I read 62 books in total, which I'm still proud of. That's still great. I felt like it was much less than that, if I'm being honest. Some months I think I only read like 1 or 2 books, but I'm shocked that I still got 62, which is great. On my best books of the year list, which is sitting right here, I have a total of 10 books, I think I decided to talk about, but I do have a top 4. And because I did move last year, I do not have all of those books with me. I only have 3 of them physically with me. So I will insert pictures of the ones that I do not have. So in no particular order, except the last 4 that I mentioned will be my top 4 favorites, which are like books that I don't know, I'll talk about that more then. Those will be my top 4 favorites. But I don't think any of these books are necessarily favorite books of all time. I don't think any of these books necessarily made it on my favorite books of all time list. So the first book that I put on this list, again, in no order except for the last 4 that I mentioned, is going to be Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. Yes, Letters to a Young Poet. I have this Little Black Classics edition. I read this. This is one of the first books that I read last year in January. And I highlighted so many passages in this book. Can you even see? Yeah. They're in there somewhere. Take my word for it. I highlighted stuff. Basically, this is a collection of letters that Rilke has written to an aspiring poet. And it's essentially talking about his philosophy of being an artist, but it's also, to me, his philosophy on how to interact with life, really, and how to find your own soul, essentially, and how you need to go away to find yourself, kind of. You need to remove yourself from the world to find your own voice, and what have you, is kind of like my takeaway from it now that I have. I do definitely want to reread this. I'm sure there's a lot more to it that I felt right after I read it and what have you. But that's my main takeaway going forward. I actually flipped to this page. I'll read it to you. Dear Mr. Capus, love your solitude and bear the pain it causes you, with melody wrought with lament. For the people who are close to you, you tell me are far away, and that shows that you are beginning to create a wider space around you. And if what is close is far, then the space around you is wide indeed and already among the stars. Take pleasure in your growth, in which no one can accompany you, and be kind-hearted towards those you leave behind, and be assured and gentle with them, and do not plague them with your doubts or frighten them with your confidence or your joyfulness, that's hard to say, which they cannot understand. So I did really love this. This is definitely something that you can reread many times. It does remind me of I feel like I'd put it as like a cousin to, by Karl Ove Knausgaard. It's in the Why I Write series. It's called Inadvertent. I'd say these are kind of similar, but this is the classic, obviously. And then the next on the list, which I don't have with me, is A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I also read this pretty early on in 2023. I think I read it in February. I read it on an airplane, I remember. At the time, I only gave it 3 stars, and I'm probably just gonna leave that rating. But this is why star ratings kind of can be difficult, right? Because I think really the brilliance of literature and art is what you take away from it in the long run. So how it sits with you, how it marinates in your own mind, body, and soul. and what you can, again, take away from it in the long run. So, that might be something different to each person, which is also really cool and really beautiful. But A Movable Feast, I've thought about it a lot since I've read it, and it's really just about Hemingway's life living in Paris, being a writer and kind of starting his writing career. It's about him visiting Shakespeare and Company, which I forget what the name of it was then, but it's Shakespeare and Company, the bookstore, and the woman who started it and owned it, and his friendships with lots of other famous writers, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, among other people, and his opinion on what they wrote and who they were as writers. And I've thought about it a lot since I've read it, so that's why it's a favorite book of 2023. I'd really recommend reading it if you're interested in literature, or books, or whatever. I'm assuming you are if you're watching BookTube, but I'd really recommend reading A Movable Feast. I love Hemingway. I really, really love Hemingway. I don't want to say he creeps up on you, because he is, I feel like you do notice his brilliance when you're reading him, but he does kind of creep up on you, because he's so simple, but he's so deceptively simple. Anyway, the next book I have on my list is by my best man in the world, Kurt Vonnegut. I love Kurt Vonnegut so much, and I didn't read any of his fiction last year, but I did read one of his nonfiction books, which was actually, he didn't compile it. I think someone put together a collection of his speeches that he gave at various different schools and colleges. It was called If This Isn't Nice, What Is? And first of all, the sentence, I love that concept of his, or that thought that he has, that he's presented to me. I forget where I first read it. I think I first read it in his book Timequake, which is probably my least favorite of his. That was my washer dryer, sorry. I think I read it in Timequake, which is probably my least favorite of his. I think it's fiction. I wasn't sure. It kind of read a little bit like nonfiction, but anyway, I think it was fiction. And at the end, there was a sentence where his character said something like, oh yeah, when you're sitting there, and I think he was sitting like at a barbecue or something, and he said, sometimes you really do just have to look around you and say, wow, if this isn't nice, what is? And it makes me tear up because I'm emotional. It really does make me tear up every time I think about it, because, let me get myself together. It really does make me tear up every time I think about it, because life really is about the small things. It really is about the small things. And I feel like we get so caught up in just whatever we get caught up in. We get caught up with so many different things in life that we don't take time to really sit and appreciate the magnificence of the simple, small things that really are the big things. First of all, love that concept. It's great. I say that to myself quite often. What is, if this isn't nice, what is about? Again, it's just a compilation of many of his speeches that he's given, and he does repeat himself a lot. He does repeat himself a lot within the various speeches, of course, but I just love Kurt Vonnegut, and I love his advice on life. I love the way he looks at the world. I just think that he's a really beautiful person, and he's a really cool person. He's funny, he's interesting, he's warm, he's funny. He's just funny and warm, and I love him. So I'd really recommend picking that up if you like Kurt Vonnegut. Love that. My sister gave that to me for Christmas in 2022. The next book that I have, again, I don't have it with me here, but it is Happy Place by Emily Henry. I just really enjoyed my reading experience of this. I do really like Emily Henry. Happy Place is her most recently published work. It's her most recently published work. She's a new one coming out this year, which I'm excited about. But I felt like this was her best, and I felt like it felt really mature. The relationship to me felt really mature. It was basically about this couple who had been, and a group of friends. It was about a couple, main couple, and their group of friends, and the couple had been together since they were in college. The friend group was really close from when they were in college. Now, present day in the story, they are grown adults, and they spend time together at a place in kind of like the Hamptons, I don't know, some beach house. One year they come and they are no longer together anymore, but they pretend that they're still together, and it's basically just like the drama that ensues from that, and their discussions and them coming together and their complications, like what brought them apart as romances go. Again, I just thought it was super mature. I really appreciated it when I read it. It really absorbed me. I think Emily Henry's just, she's very in control of what she's doing. She does it really well, and she's funny. She's kind of funny too. I will say that the ending I felt like wrapped up a little bit too easily. I had a friend in real life that read the book, and she really hated the ending because she felt like it was unrealistic. And I will say it did wrap up a little bit easy, but whatever, I was still here for it. Then we have Red Rising. We have Red Rising, which I actually listened to on audiobook. And audiobooks, that's probably why I felt like I read less than I did last year, because I listened to a decent amount of audiobooks, which was the first year. Last year was the first year I really kind of got into audiobooks, which I've been enjoying this year as well so far. So I listened to Red Rising. I really liked it. I was so invested in that story, man. I was so invested in that story. I did since then start listening to Golden Sun. I think I've only listened to like 30 minutes of it. I started it like a month ago, but it did like that weird thing where there was a time jump, like 2 years in the future, which gives me the ick, but I still am excited to get back into it when I decide to get back into it. But anyway, Red Rising, loved it. Gave it 5 stars. If you don't already know what Red Rising is about, and I think it's an adult sci-fi. I feel like it reads kind of like very old, young adult. But anyway, it's a sci-fi story about this society where people are broken down into a caste system based on the color of their blood, essentially. So we have golds at the top and we have reds at the bottom, and we fall in like a bunch of colors in between, that their color dictates what their occupation essentially is in society, and how they're treated and viewed and all that stuff. But we follow a red who is the lowest of the reds, and his name is Darrow. In the beginning, his wife dies as a martyr to provoke Darrow to then kind of get involved with this rebellion. So that's essentially what happens in the book, and then he gets absorbed by this group. He gets turned into a gold, which was really fun and interesting to read. His education, his diet, his workout regime was really cool. They were feeding him creatine, which I thought that was really interesting and funny to read. Yeah, and then he gets into the society and he goes to this school, which is not really a school. It's like they throw all these freaking kids into, I don't know, this like pit simulator, not like a pit, this like land where all of the head gold adults can like watch, kind of like the Hunger Games, honestly. They like have to deal with their own society where everyone's like dying and killing each other, and they have to survive and what have you. I don't know, it was just so good. It was just so good. It was so good. I love Red Rising. Pierce Brown is such a good writer. I felt like it had a lot of philosophical depth to it, which is what really made it stand out. It wasn't so much about the plot for me. It was, I feel like Pierce Brown really understood his characters. I feel like he really understood the plight of his characters, where they were at, and how they interacted with each other, and just the way that Darrow thought. I loved him as a character so much, and yeah, it just really moved me. I felt like Pierce Brown was super in control of his story, his characters, his themes, concepts, ideas, and I'd really recommend reading it if you have not already. Next on my list, I considered making this like an honorable mention, but anyway, we have The Serpent and the Wings of Night and The Ashes and the Stark-Cursed King. I'm putting them together because they're a duology, and I felt like it. I really enjoyed these books. I gave the first one 5 stars, and I think the second one 4 stars, maybe 3.5. I don't remember, maybe 4. I just really enjoyed my reading experience of these books, and I felt like they were actually good too. Whereas you have Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, which I really enjoyed my reading experience, but I don't feel like I could defend the writing that much at all, or the structure of the story, if that makes sense. But we have The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King and The Serpent and the Wings of Night. That's the first one. I felt like they were controlled. I felt like they were a fun, good time. But again, the author was in control of the story, and I felt like her characters were so believable and their relationship was so believable. It was just a good time. Let me tell you what they're about. Why don't I? So the first book we basically are in a society where we have a bunch of vampires. There are humans in this world as well, but the vampires are like in control of everything. So we have all these vampires. We have our main character that we follow who, I'm so bad with names, I don't remember her name. But we have our main character who we follow who is a human who was adopted for some reason by our vampire king, who's the king of our vampires. We have two different castes of vampires, the Rashan and the something else, I forget. But two different castes of vampires who are kind of constantly at war with each other. In this world, there's this competition every 100 years or something. If you win this competition, which basically is like a fight to the death competition, but if you win, the moon goddess, who's like the goddess of all of the vampires, she comes down and grants whatever wish you have. So our main character goes in. While she's in this competition, she meets a boy. This is a fantasy romance, so she meets a boy. Chaos ensues, and it's like an enemies to lover situation. He is a vampire. I just really enjoyed it. I'd really recommend reading it if you're interested in fantasy romance and you haven't read it already. I know it's been quite popular. It's by Carissa Broadbent. I don't know if I'd mentioned that. And then we come to our top 4 books. This is 8. We come to our top 4 books of 2023. I guess we'll start with the ones that we have here. We have Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which I did listen to. This was like a 3.5-hour audiobook. I listened to this, I believe, in January of last year. So quite a while ago. And then I loved the audiobook. I listened to it in a day. I was obsessed with it. I was immersed in it. I thought that the writing was beautiful. Though it being an audiobook, I had to, because it was such beautiful writing, I had to really pay attention, which is sometimes difficult for me in audiobooks. But anyway, so I decided after I finished listening to it and gave it 5 stars that I was going to purchase it and read it physically, because I do feel like this is the type of book that I really want to and need to read physically, so that's probably what I recommend doing. I did not have to read this in high school, though I know a lot of people do. This is about European imperialism in the Congo. What this book made me feel, what I took away from it, which I find that I see in a lot of books that I read. Again, I feel like that says a lot about just me, not necessarily the books, but this book really made me think about, how do I word this? Because I really do have to reread it, but about man's fear of our own self and of our own nature. And I just thought it was really beautifully written. I really have to reread it, because again, I listened to it, I want to actually read it and understand it a bit more and understand my feelings towards it a bit more and take notes on it. I really need to do that with this book, so I'm probably going to do that this year. But I'd really recommend reading Heart of Darkness if you have not already. That's that. Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates, which I would probably say, what are the other books on this list? I would probably say this is my top 2 best books of the year, if I'm being honest. I have 2 other books by Richard Yates on my shelves here, which I'm really excited to get to eventually. But Revolutionary Road is about a couple. I can only picture Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio because that's who plays them in the movie. There's a movie. Is this set in the 50s or was it published in the 50s? I think it's set in the 50s or the 60s. Vonnegut blurbed it. The Great Gatsby of my time. One of the best books by a member of my generation. Sweet! I didn't know that. I didn't know that Vonnegut blurbed this. That's so cool. 60s? Okay, 50s and 60s. I don't know for sure. 1961. Copyright Richard Yates, 1961. Okay, there you go. But it's about a couple, and they are actors. And it starts, I think that they're... wow, now the movie is boring with the book. It starts when they're like acting in, no, this is in the book too, duh. They're acting in a local theater production, and essentially It's about their desires for their life and their large avant-garde dreams that they might have for their own life, how they romanticize what their own life should be like and what the reality of their life actually is. And it's really devastating in that regard. They're also kind of frustrating characters in that regard as well, especially the husband, who again I totally forget the name of because I never remember characters' names. Frank. There you go. Eventually end up living in the suburbs. It's about their relationship with their neighbors that they have. It's just really devastating. The concept of romanticizing life and idealizing, again, what our life should be like and the reality of life, and not having, I guess I want to say, not having gratitude for the life that we actually have, but also maybe not necessarily having the courage or the courage, yeah, I'm gonna say courage, to fulfill our dreams, or maybe it's our dreams just aren't meant to be, you know, and not being able to accept life as it is. I really enjoyed this. This is definitely something that I want to reread. I really recommend it. And that's that. The last two books on my list, again, I do not have with me here. But we have Project Hail Mary by, who wrote Project Hail Mary? Andy Weir, not Andrew. We have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which again, I listened to, I think in like February or March or something. I actually listened to it with my, not at the same time as, but with my partner. So that was a great experience that I had. We would talk about it and what have you. So I hold it near and dear to my heart for that reason. But it really is such a good book. It is such a good freaking book, and I'm so glad I listened to it, because I know for a fact I would have hated physically reading it. And I kept saying that. Like, I would have not liked it if I physically read it. I just really don't think that I would have. It's about this guy, if you don't know already. I know this was a really famous book like when it came out. Everybody read it and loved it. If you have not read it yet, listen to it. Listen to it. But it's about this guy he wakes up on a spaceship, essentially, and he has no memory at all. And he wakes up on a spaceship with all of his crew members dead. And he's, again, the only one that wakes up, and he has no memory, and he has to figure out why he's there and what to do. And he's super smart. Brilliant. Basically just him tinkering around on this spaceship, and he's talking about math a lot and science a lot, which again is why I don't think I would have liked reading it, because the tone of the audiobook narrator, it was just so good. It was so funny, it was so entertaining, it was so captivating. It was such a good performance. I really, really recommend it. And eventually he makes a friend, who's the best part of the whole book. When all that comes into play, it's absolutely the best part. But we get, as his memory starts to come back, we get flashbacks. That's how you say it. We get flashbacks of his memory coming back and why he's there, and the whole story kind of plays out. Yeah, I really recommend Project Hail Mary. It was such a great experience for me. Last but not least, which is probably my top favorite book of the year, absolutely have nothing to fault with this book at all. But that is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I'd previously, a couple years ago, read The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver, and I really didn't care for it, if I'm being honest. But Demon Copperhead, I believe, won the Women's Prize for Fiction last year, which is why I picked it up, because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize. But again, it did end up winning. It is just a flawless book, and it's set in the Appalachian... I don't even know how to say that. It's set in Appalachia, set in the South, and it's about the opioid crisis, essentially. But we follow our main character, whose name is Demon Copperhead, and that's his nickname, but that's his name. And it's just about his life, and it's kind of a retelling of, or it pays homage to David Copperfield, which I have not read, but I know that it pays homage to David Copperfield. It's about his rags to riches story. It's him from conception to wherever the end of the story leaves us off at. It's just about his life, and it's about his relationships, and it's about his drug addiction that comes on, It's about all these people around him and their drug addictions and why they ended up in these situations, and just all these people around him that are terrible, but then his beautiful relationships and the good people around him too. And it's just one of those stories that takes you in, and you experience this person's life with them, and it's so well done. Again, I've been saying this a lot throughout this video, but Barbara Kingsolver, she's a phenomenal writer, and even when I was reading The Lacuna, I could tell that she's a master of her craft, as people say. She's a master of her craft. She's totally in control of her story and her characters, and everything felt so real. So I'd really recommend Demon Copperhead if you have not already read it. It was fantastic. I've actually, since reading it, you can see my mess on my desk, that's okay. Since reading it, picked up Poisonwood Bible. But yes, that is that. Those are my best books of 2023. What were your favorite books of 2023? Please do let me know. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a beautiful morning, evening, noon, or night, wherever the sun is in your sky. Goodbye.